The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's one-on-one in 10 with educational academic Professor Welby Ings on the radical NCEA changes. Kia ora, Professor Welby. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Kia ora, mate.
Comrade, I was taken with the passion in your interview a fortnight ago on Q&A with Jack Tame regarding the role of public education and its purpose in an egalitarian democracy. You are an educational academic, an author, a professor, a film writer, and you have an enormous respect and mana in the field of teaching. So, firstly, what are your thoughts on the government's NCEA announcement?
I look at it this way. That announcement is talking about the gates at the end of compulsory education. And most New Zealanders will pass through that. Our generations will pass through that. So you have great care to take of those gates so that each person who walks through has their dignity intact and has grown the best version of themselves they can. So how you design those gates is really important. It has to be sophisticated, not fundamentalist. It's got to be able to enable a person to grow to the best version of themselves so they release the best version of themselves into an uncertain future. And so fundamentalist solutions to that, simplified, generalized things don't work. So NCEA, one of its advantages was it had flexibility, but it did become unwieldy. So it's our job now to make sure, one, that this doesn't get rushed through, and two, that we bring really good reasoned consideration to what happens to people who don't match the template.
Yeah.
What happens to them? So if you go, we're going to bring in exams, everything's going to have 50% exam, and you go, so how's that going to work out for visual arts? You know, putting people, if exam means putting people in a room with a clock ticking and 50 questions, how does that work for drama, for music, for, so we have to match however we decide to, I don't like the word examine, I would say externally assess. We have to find the right way of measuring different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of ability. And at the moment, we're given a very, very shallow picture of something that needs a lot more digging to, so I'm very proud of the New Zealand education system.
Yeah.
We have some astounding roots, especially in our understanding that we have to care for everybody to get the best intellectual health in our country. So we are as strong as our weakest point and as strong as our strongest point. And we have to, and given, you know, that, so we know one of the major problems we face. So in 2018, when those stats came out, we were ranked 33 out of 38 in the OECD countries for uneven education.
Yes.
Some people get it. We are very low in the world with it. So we have many amazing things, but we don't have fairness.
You argued in your Q&A interview that public education has an obligation to empower everyone who is taught by it. And I was embarrassed by having to be reminded of that. Why have we lost sight of the common good public education builds in a society?
Well, I think for many teachers, they haven't. They struggle against a system. And so they're having to behave with kind of a professional disobedience to make something work. When you're in the intellectually intimate relationship with someone who's learning, policy actually is only an impediment or an aid. It isn't the thing that shapes learning.
Right.
That's the relationship between those people. So I think that sometimes policy, especially policy that comes from panic, when somebody says, you know, things have just gone to hell in a handbag, and so let's bring in this solution, and when you lift anxiety in a population, you can bring in fundamentalist answers.
Right.
So the answer to that is take reasoned, considered, compassionate debate. And that's where media sits in. That's where discussion. And so going, well, let's do a quick turnaround on this is antithetical to what it would need. It would need reasoned, careful debate. And educators, parents, communities, they are more than happy to have that.
You
I'm more than
challenged
happy.
you challenged the concept of naked competition between students and made the point that we actually collaborate with one another in society. Can you expand on that idea and the type of educational system that creates it?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, let's put it this way. If I go to the doctor, I want diagnosis. I want to be the most healthy being I can. So I want a health professional who will give me a diagnosis, not comparative assessment. I want something to diagnose me. So if we understand that the role of education is not to provide workers to attract overseas investment and then create an economy that way, but is to grow the intellectual and social health of all New Zealanders,
Right?
then we would come into a world that was trying to not build the success of some people on the debris of other people's failure, but actually create a rigorously a rigorous system that worked to grow each individual. And that is not la la land.
Yeah.
This country has had people from all over the world come to see. It has one of the most socialized and discursive education systems in the world. So between the 40s and the 70s, people came over to this country to look at this extraordinary experiment.
Yes.
That arguably gave us a nation of high innovators, of people who can work outside templates. So I'm not romanticizing that. There was some awful racist stuff in there. There was a whole lot of bad stuff. But there was the idea that we have a responsibility to look after us,
Yeah.
not the individual high flyer, because we have to live in a world of us.
Sure.
We
Well,
live in a world where we get by working with strategic cooperation.
yeah.
Strategic because we want something and we're going to get that thing by being able to work well with other people, including people who we don't agree with, who have different ways of looking at the world. And so when you look at people who are, we call them leaders, or we call them great diplomats, or whatever, they are people who can work with difference. So they're not seeing the world adversarially as this is me taking on every individual who crosses my path like some bad video game.
Yeah.
You go, no, no, we live in a beautifully complex world. And the skills we need is to know how to work with other people so we get the maximum out of a relational way of understanding knowledge. And that, we've been hugely resourced by Maori ways of knowing knowledge as relational,
Yeah.
rather than discrete silos that you pick and you perform and you compete with everybody to try and come out on top.
Will we see a return to scaled grades that automatically fail some students?
It's up to us to stop that. So we have to stop that, because that is a toxic thing to do, because the simple point is that no matter what the assessment system you use, it will always be flawed. It will have some strengths and it will have some weaknesses. So when we rank people, that comes from what Todd Rose calls a Thorndyking system, a system which came out of eugenics,
Yes.
which said that people can all be ranked, and then you can peel off little groups to go to different parts in society. The opposite is the humanist view, which goes, it's no good ranking things that are fundamentally different to each other. You have to understand difference and work out how you grow the best of all those things to live communally.
What should our education system be doing? Creating critical thinking citizens or worker drones? Because all of the
Yeah.
vocational talk I'm hearing just sounds like it's dooming some kids to certain roles in life and they're not going to advance beyond that.
So, when I left school, I was unemployed for some time. I couldn't get a job. When I left school, I wanted a job. I can understand anybody leaving, and especially if you go to university, then you've got loans to pay back. Of course, we want a job. Of course, that's a real thing. It is one real thing. Another real thing is that we want to be able to live in a world without dying in echo chambers and rabbit holes because we didn't develop enough ability to discern the truth from falsehood.
Yeah.
We have to have both of those things. So taking a purely an idea that education is there to serve an economic need is only understanding part of a question. If you only have that, you don't have a healthy society. And I mean, I'm uneasy about Roosevelt, but I always remember that thing that he said was what, to educate a man in mind and not in morals is to educate a menace to society.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's
What do you
true.
what do you say to parents and grandparents who feel frustrated at the lack of information NCEA report cards give them in terms of where their children are academically achieving? Because it seems like it's their feelings that are really driving this change.
It's also teachers are cobbled. Teachers who actually do know, who could tell them much more, are cobbled. Like, for instance, when someone says to me, "How's my child doing?" I know that what they're really asking is, "How does my child learning?"
Yeah,
Really.
yeah.
Tell me about my diagnose. Give me a. I mean, they don't use this word. They want to know how is Hemi or Sarah or Lily or Thomas? How are they learning? Because I look after their education outside of school.
Yeah.
So, but what happens in a system that becomes too obsessed with mapping people against milestones or imagined descriptors of intelligence or success is that the descriptions relate to the milestones and not to the learner.
Right. Is there is
There's a
there a,
difference.
is there a fear that reverting to grades will help establish league tables that enable charter schools at the cost of public education? Because David Seymour is very clear that his aspiration is that the majority of public schools in New Zealand become charter schools.
So David Seymour doesn't run this country. This country is run by people, and uh, my view. So that's fine. He's allowed to have that view, but in fact, if you listen to educators, it's a silly view. We live in a much more complex society. We need more sophisticated thinking behind it. So we can, because education is one of our taonga, it's one of our precious things. We have to care for it like a precious thing. To do that, we can't use dumbed down boxes to try and shove it into. We've got to use flexibility and a mix. I think of it this way, as a mixture of rational, compassionate thinking. So we're always thinking of how is this doing? Does this work for the us? And then how does that at the same time extend the most brilliant uneven thinker and the gifted generalist and the person who's been damaged and is fearful and feels injured? How does it do all those things? And you can do it. So one of the fundamentalist answers is this other stuff doesn't work. It's just woolly woofed rubbish. It's not woolly whiffed rubbish. This country actually has a long history of some very successful things based on a highly socialized education system, a highly discursive education system, a highly cooperative education system. It's led the world at times. So we're not some backwater group of people who have no, and we also have cultural examples of it. That is where knowledge has grown from these two great trajectories of scholarship, Maori scholarship and the European scholarship. They see the world broadly differently. One is more relational, understands that there's a connection between the human being, between the earth, between ideas, between relationships, and the other one tends to be disciplinary. But they coexist. So we've got two lots of fertilizing coming into our thinking.
Finally, you have a book out right now, Invisible Intelligence: Why Your Child Might Not Be Failing. Where can people grab a copy?
I am the worst salesman, mate. I'm conscious. My publishers would shoot me. I think it's I think it's in most bookshops, but
Yes.
I definitely know it's at Unity Books because I walked past there today, and I'm going to sound like such a wanker. Forgive this, but it was the #1 bestseller.
It
yeah.
is. No.
And
I'm so excited about looking forward to reading your book. Look, thank you, Professor. I honestly believe an educator and academic of your passion needs to be central in this NCEA debate. Kia kaha. Thank you, Professor. Pleasure.